What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Dead Pioneers. I very much enjoyed my opening experience with this group. Big shout out to Kim for bringing them to my attention, and given what they sing about and the nature of their music, I'm surprised they didn't come across my radar. I suppose I'm so focused on the various deep dives I'm doing, and ultimately I'm not quite on Discogs as much as I used to be, so maybe that's part of it. But yes, very happy to learn of them. Native American punk band, clearly with some muckraking and dissident ideas, so fitting in with a lot of bands I listen to, you know, older ones that don't exist anymore, at least not in their original form, like Dead Kennedys, but also those who continue to this day, Subhumans and Bad Religion and so on. So yes, very much enjoyed the first track from these guys, and this next one is Post-American, and the S in post is written as a $sign, so we already can get some sense of the meaning there. Kim's note on this one is that it is essentially an American history lesson from the point of view of an indigenous person or from Native Americans. So yes, that is of course indicative of what I would expect as someone who has studied for my historical focus as an undergrad and especially as a grad student on indigenous American history from the point of view of tribal groups as opposed to from the framing of Europeans and Euro-Americans who had very culturally, let's say, prejudicial attitudes, who used their political power and military power to marginalize and justify what they were doing upon the grounds of things like manifest destiny and, you know, cultural enrichment or the assimilation of primitive peoples and so on, all of which was not only a gross injustice on ethical and moral grounds, but also an indication of a, what's the right phrase? The point of view of those who have self-righteous, that's the phrase I was looking for, a self-righteous view based on, you know, held notions of cultural superiority and the presumption of teleological, religious, and other ideas, which felt that anything that got in the way of that has to be either assimilated or swept out of the way or otherwise conquered. So yes, I would expect it to take a much more critical view of American history, what it's meant for marginalized peoples, indigenous peoples, and the way in which those who were the champions and promulgators of this domination, exploitation, and submission are in fact not only guilty of crimes in a more literal sense, but have poisoned further generations. And indeed, part of Kim's note was that the lies and the justifications and the mantras or narratives that those who were perpetrating these atrocities told themselves have continued to have consequences and led to hatred and bigotry and continued exploitation and marginalization right into the present. So that's what I would expect to hear given what Kim said and given the flavor I got of their lyrics and attitude in the first track, which again was very old school throwback, like early 80s muckraking punk rock, which is, you know, again, listening to Subhumans and Bad Religion and a number of other bands from that time, some of which continue into the present. That's very much, if not my favorite flavor of punk rock, certainly one of the ones I listen to the most significantly. So let's give it a listen. This is Dead Pioneers. The track is Post-American, and it's from 2025.
White independence, great. All the white folks get a clean slate. Freedom sold as the newest elixir. American white, not an ethnic mixer. A country built on genocide. Wrestle with the facts and don't run and hide. Sets a tone for us countrywide. Blind nationalism, American pride. Fuck you in your little patriot circle. Fuck your capitalist infomercial. Your multi-level marketing at best. Imperialist cult, hand on your breast. Tax paid for war while we succumb. Just to make middle-class slums. Criminalize being broke. Yeah, we chalk it up to being woke. America is so star-spangled awesome. A nice place where the empire blossoms. Killing natives, built on slave labor too. When you bleed red, white, and blue. With open hands, giant toddlers with demands. Check your notes, what's the result? Your people are in a fascist cult. Fed hopes in the American dream, fed equality and star-spangled themes. We are a nation of death and the gun. We're all nearly post-American.
Oh, I love it. I was thinking about the phrase postmodern and, other uses of that prefix in terms of, we're now in a phase and in a dynamic that is beyond this thing which has characterized so much history, and in this case post-American, meaning not American in a imperialist, self-righteous, justifying and fairy tale telling Pledge of Allegiance. And again, we're educating and incorporating and assimilating those who are actually benefiting from us. And again, it all makes this great story, but it is nothing more than that, and it's one that distorts, one that glosses over atrocities and the genocide that the country is certainly built on. Now, of course, there are other ways of looking at the United States vis-a-vis like countries in Europe and other countries that were still, rooted in monarchy and, arguments from authority and so on. But the reality is the United States, for all its brave talk about democracy and a democratic republic and so on, still had powerful people exploiting those below them, criminalizing being poor, as the song talks about, not allowing influence and power or even full citizenship to those who look different from the powerful few, making money on the backs of those who are actually doing the work, and, in modern times, building up, middle-class slums. That's a great line. So, yes, killing natives overtly referenced, and in the case of this band, that's a perhaps particularly poignant and important facet of the history they're characterizing. And ultimately the idea that you would know all this, you would learn all this, or you would try to diminish or downplay or emphasize only the positive and wave a flag and again put your hand over your heart, it's all indicative of why these prejudices persist, and why that type of exploitation and that type of the few at the top exploiting those below them. It's why this system is allowed to continue, because people are, cheering for it. And I love that idea that criticizing that in any way, being dissident to that type of attitude and critiquing those who would, be in these patriotic circles that are being specifically attacked in this song. The idea that doing anything different from that or calling that out for what it is just chalked up as, oh, you're just woke, which, again, in the last several years, it's a word that has like very specific origins and certain like academic assessments of history and culture and politics, but it was then like co-opted, expanded to the point where it's nebulous and it's used as a catch-all for anything that's seen as going against this, rah U.S. patriotic attitude. Patriotic, I'm going to put in scare quotes, which is really like hyper-nationalistic. So, again, as someone who gets frustrated where, you ask someone who uses that word in a denigrating way, well, what does woke mean to you? You use that a lot. You use it as an epithet, as a derogatory term a lot. What does it actually mean? What does it actually mean to you? You'll either get a very meandering answer that, seemingly is all over the place and maybe internally inconsistent, and or it's essentially boils down to anything I don't like, anything that goes against the way I see things, well, that's woke, because it's easier to use a word like that to just dismiss out of hand anything that challenges your, again, like storybook understanding of history and politics and culture and ethnicity, and then allows you to continue feeling good about the way you and others who see things like you feel, and choose to regard history and the present and, you know, these national slogans of equality and, you know, equal opportunity and so on, which have been anything but that, and which continue to be, you know, exploited by, again, the idea of, what was it, like the multi-level marketing and so on. Like, there's just some really clever phrases in here, and I like the way this one had a like heavier plotting sound. It eventually gets a bit faster, but it feels all very dissonant, all very warped and, you know, off kilter, which speaks to, again, the idea that like we're all here, and, you know, those who study history especially, like, we kind of know the reality. And again, there, it's like funny to me that, you know, people even in higher education sometimes who take this attitude, well, but, you know, the US, you know, for all its faults and all its warts and so on, it was still better than other places, as if like the independent merit of one thing can be justified by comparing it favorably to other entities. It's like, well, no, like, you can say that maybe the US was more inclusive marginally than some other, again, European monarchies or other places around the world, but that doesn't whitewash everything that was exploitative, brutal, genocidal, prejudicial, racist, and so on. It's like saying A is slightly better than B is not a justification of A independent of anything else, and it certainly doesn't mean that the stories that we tell about national history and so on are more relevant just because they fit that terminology like 0.5% better than in other cases. So yeah, I do love the cleverness, the incisiveness, and the perspectives in, again, history and politics and, you know, culture that this band seems to advocate. I will note the vocals again sounded like spoken word, like as much as anything else. I wouldn't be surprised if there's, you know, some shout singing and so on along the way, but so far it seems like they do kind of have that suicidal tendencies, like we're just telling it the way it is, to where we're almost just speaking. So yeah, very much enjoying this group. Again, on this channel, I'm not apolitical when I talk about, you know, Subhuman songs or bad religion songs, or bad brain songs for that matter. I will, of course, delve into what I think the songs are about, and in some cases, you know, talking about the way as a historian and just as a human who likes to, you know, try to be as understanding and acknowledging of the hard truths of reality. And indeed, shout out to Kim, the sort of category that she placed the two Dead Pioneers songs under was the idea of hard truths, things that we don't want to face. And I love that idea that, you know, there was a lyric in the song that, like, you know, rather than, you know, hiding from these hard truths, the best is to face it and deal with it. And I think, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but that was the essence of the line, that, like, you know, you can't hide away from this, you can't run away from this, you have to face it and acknowledge it, and only then can we begin to, you know, have new perspectives and healing, and perhaps not let these bad ideas, these lies, and these, you know, problems that stem from them trickle down into future generations. So yeah, ultimately, as I said, try not to be necessarily apolitical, but of course I'm trying to engage with music on its own terms, and, you know, as I've said, people, all manner of people are welcome here, but, you know, when you talk about a song like this, you know, you just have to face it for what it is. You have to face it head on. And again, as someone who is very into dissident punk rock with progressive values and pluralistic perspectives and so on, this feels very up my alley. So again, shout out to Kim for introducing me to Dead Pioneers, as well as to Brian, who my understanding is, you know, particularly interested in the reactions. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing more from them in the future, and ultimately I respect and have great sympathy for what they're saying in their themes and lyrics. So yes, once again, let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.